NATO should not accept Ukraine for Ukraine's sake. The top 5 reasons that expanding the Western alliance would make Kyiv even worse off. It's tragically belated, especially considering the toll of over 500,000 deceased Ukrainians. NATO and Western leaders, such as Macron, nudged Ukraine towards these expansionist aspirations within NATO. Yet, those comfortably seated in Paris, London, and Washington D.C. faced no repercussions. Instead, they amassed billions by peddling weapons funded by taxpayers, all under the guise of the conflict in Ukraine. It's nauseating to witness the grim reality behind the manipulative maneuvers, where the lives of Ukrainians are recklessly sacrificed for the profits and strategic games of puppet masters. They were fully aware that Ukraine stood no chance in this conflict against Russia, yet they thrust comedian Zelensky into the role of a misguided Napoleon, portraying him as a valiant fighter against the supposed enemies of the West. Now, we're on the brink of the most perilous escalation of this conflict, where even the puppet masters risk losing control over the threat of nuclear war. The recent leaked conversation from Germany, discussing the bombing of the bridge between Russia and Ukraine in Singapore, may lead to dire consequences. It's conceivable that we might soon witness a new division, akin to the Berlin Wall, owing to the whims of a few self-proclaimed military strategists. Their only hope seems to lie in the swift return of Trump to power before a nuclear confrontation with Russia ensues, spelling potential catastrophe. The consequences of NATO expansion, a cautionary tale for Ukraine's future. In recent years, the question of whether Ukraine should join NATO has been a contentious issue, with proponents arguing that membership would enhance the country's security and stability, while opponents warn of the risks of provoking Russia. However, a closer examination reveals that NATO membership may not be in Ukraine's best interest. By analyzing historical events such as Boris Johnson's intervention in killing a peace accord in Istanbul in 2022 and considering the broader geopolitical context, this essay will explore 5 reasons why expanding the Western alliance would make Kyiv even worse off. Reason 1: Historical precedent of Western betrayal. One of the key arguments against NATO membership for Ukraine is the historical precedent of Western betrayal. The case of Boris Johnson's intervention in Istanbul serves as a prime example. In 2022, Johnson's actions derailed a potential peace accord between Ukraine and Russia, highlighting how Western leaders prioritized their own interests over those of Ukraine. This betrayal underscores the risks of placing Ukraine's security in the hands of NATO, which may prioritize its own strategic objectives over the well-being of its member states. Reason 2: Escalation of conflict with Russia. Another consequence of NATO expansion is the escalation of conflict with Russia. As seen in the case of Ukraine, the prospect of NATO membership has heightened tensions with Moscow, leading to a dangerous standoff that risks spiraling into a full-scale war. By aligning itself with NATO, Ukraine risks becoming further embroiled in the geopolitical rivalry between the West and Russia, with potentially devastating consequences for its security and stability. Reason 3: Economic burden of NATO membership. Joining NATO also entails significant economic costs for Ukraine. As seen in other Eastern European countries, such as Poland and Romania, the process of modernizing and integrating military infrastructure to meet NATO standards is a costly endeavor that places a strain on national resources. Moreover, the economic sanctions imposed on Russia as a result of the conflict further exacerbate Ukraine's economic challenges, making NATO membership a potentially costly proposition for the country. Reason 4: Lack of guarantees for security. Despite the promises of security and protection that NATO membership may offer, there are no guarantees that Ukraine would be adequately defended in the event of a Russian incursion. As seen in the case of Crimea and Donbass, Western powers have been reluctant to intervene militarily in conflicts with Russia, preferring diplomatic solutions that often come at the expense of Ukraine's territorial integrity. By joining NATO, Ukraine may find itself in a situation where its security is dependent on the whims of its Western allies, with no assurance of effective protection. Reason 5: Further polarization of Ukrainian society. Finally, NATO membership risks exacerbating internal divisions within Ukrainian society. As seen in other countries, such as Georgia, the prospect of joining NATO has fueled political polarization and social unrest, as different factions within society vie for control over the country's foreign policy orientation. In Ukraine, where historical divisions between the East and West are already pronounced, NATO membership may deepen these cleavages, leading to instability and conflict within the country. Conclusion. In conclusion, while the question of NATO membership for Ukraine may seem like a straightforward issue of security and stability, a closer examination reveals a more complex and nuanced picture. By analyzing historical events such as Boris Johnson's intervention in Istanbul and considering the broader geopolitical context, it becomes clear that NATO expansion may not be in Ukraine's best interest. From the risk of escalating conflict with Russia to the economic burden of membership, joining NATO poses significant challenges and uncertainties for Ukraine's future. Instead of blindly pursuing membership in the Western alliance, Ukrainian policymakers should carefully weigh the costs and benefits and consider alternative strategies for ensuring the country's security and stability in a volatile geopolitical environment.